Welcome to the Employee Advocacy and Influence podcast. My name's Lewis Gray. My co host is Elliot Elsley. And in today's episode, we went behind the scenes of one of the most ambitious global employee advocacy programs out there with none other than Joe Morris, who is the former head of social media and employee advocacy at Capgemini. Joe was responsible for evolving and scaling Capgemini's program across an organization that boasts a whopping 340,000 employees. Joe shared insights on how their approach moved from basic content sharing to real influence and employee credibility, and why leadership buy-in and trust are more important than ever. One of my favorite parts of this chat, though, Joe described how he and his team used what they called an impact score, which is essentially a monthly rating for groups of advocates, to introduce a friendly sense of competition across teams. After implementing this, suddenly people were motivated to not just post, but to improve and climb the leaderboard. And as you'll hear, that momentum made a real difference. So without further ado, let's dive in. Okay, Joe, so first and foremost, welcome to the podcast. Thank you very much for joining us. I was just hoping you'd be able to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your role.
Sure. So my name is Joe Morris. I have worked in marketing and content for 25 years, just aging myself. I'm old. Actually, my very first job was actually doing photocopies and faxes and receiving deliveries from DHL and FedEx constantly, and putting zip drives onto bikes and sending off to some other part of London. And then copy editor, copywriter, kind of content manager, digital projects, working with designers, and creating video, producing a lot of videos, doing interviews and all that kind of stuff, working with camera crews. And then digital campaigns, so moving into social and running at Capgemini. I was the first kind of global digital campaigns manager at Capgemini. So running all the kind of the social side of things, web content as well for global campaigns. And then I was head of social at Capgemini, and in fact, again, actually, it was the first time they'd had somebody with that title. And so my career sort of followed the kind of the evolution of digital marketing quite closely, actually. And then so head of social, managing very large community network of social media managers around the globe, and LinkedIn channels and all that kind of stuff. And then latterly, very strong focus on employee advocacy as our kind of strategy and approach to social evolved. So then I would say like 60% of my day was spent talking about advocacy and how to make it happen. And that's me. I was born in Southeast London, lived there for a long time now, live in outside Atlanta, Georgia.
Lovely. And I'm a Norfolk native myself. You wouldn't believe it because I've gotten the name of the place wrong just there. Am I right in saying you were University of East Anglia alumni?
I did, yeah. Yeah, it was back in the 90s, so it was quite a long time ago. But yeah, I did English and American literature.
Thank you, Joe, for giving us that background. I'm so fascinated to hear about people's roles and just how they got into, well, just people's experience, to be honest with you, and just hearing your career journey. I think it's fascinating just hearing that. I don't know how you've been able to apply that creative aspect and how it's naturally morphed into that marketing role is brilliant. And also, you said you spent half of your 60% of your days talking about advocacy and telling people how to do it. I like to think that's what we do here on the podcast. So I think we found a perfect guest, to say the least.
I'm always happy to talk about advocacy. So
Love it.
it's a good place to be.
So I'm going to start with quite a, I don't want to say a deep question. So I guess we'll come on to Capgemini's program, but I just wanted to ask you broadly, when you think about influence in the context of employees, to you, what makes it meaningful or valuable and impactful to a business?
Well, it's the I look at advocacy as the most intimate channel. If you want to look at it as a channel, it's the most intimate one that a business can have, because it is literally one-to-one personal connections. As much as marketers love to talk about how people having a connection with a brand, and of course they do. Although I'd say maybe it's not so much a connection as an impression, a feeling about a brand. Um, but it's really about the people, and especially like in B2B, in the services industry, where you're not selling little boxes, you're selling people and services. And so the more that you can get your people out there and build authentic relationships with your target audience, the better. And in a way that people are going to connect with a LinkedIn post from somebody in their network much more so than with a post from the company. So to my mind, they play very different roles, and you know, customer intimacy is what any brand wants. Doesn't matter the B2B or B2C. It's about knowing what who your customer is and what they want, and being able to put it in front of them. So advocacy is really, in this day and age, it's to my arguably the most important route to market, I think.
I couldn't agree more on that front. I think particularly you mentioned in regards to professional services, consulting businesses, things like that. The thing you're selling is expertise at the end of the day, which I think is such an interesting for those that aren't uptaking on this in the same way. You're losing market share if you want to use a kind of larger scale marketing term. You're losing share of voice if you're not posting it. McKinsey are. If you're not posting it, PA Consulting are, whoever it might be. You need your experts that are in a particular industry, whatever that industry or vertical is that they deal in, talking about why they're an expert in it and highlighting it and taking away from others, but also for the clients that they have, that they already work with, that they partner with on a regular basis, reinforcing that process, almost defending that kind of cohort of customers that you already have, I think is so important as well.
I use the analogy of a conference. Like LinkedIn, for instance, is a 24/7 conference, business conference. And so therefore, if you're not, yeah, you can have your company page, which is a bit like having a booth in a side hall which only a few people go to. But if you haven't got your people pushing out there in the conference, making conversations, setting up meetings, doing presentations, and so on, then that's the same. If you're not there on LinkedIn, then you're not at the conference. So therefore, yeah, you've got your competitors are busy talking up a storm, and nobody hears from you.
I use exactly the same analogy in so many conversations. And I also use it in regards to, particularly in regards to scale, bigger businesses that have the ability. It's like going to a conference and setting loose 2,000 employees into the conference. They're going to talk to absolutely everybody there, comparatively to the smaller businesses that you might be competing against, that they just physically can't keep up, and
Yeah,
vice versa. You can gain just a huge advantage by just scale and just operating something like this at scale as well.
yeah, that's true. Although that is disappointing that you used that analogy, because I thought I was the only one who was being very clever. But never mind.
I've been around the block on advocacy for the past 8 years, and I think I probably saw you post about it. I think that was probably the most likely scenario.
Yeah, just going back to the analogy of it being a conference, I think if you put it in the context of salespeople as well and getting salespeople active on social media, if you were to pay to send, forget 2,000, if you sent 5 salespeople to a conference and when they came back, it's like, who did you speak to? What conversations did you have? Oh, we didn't. We stayed silent the whole time. It's like,
Yeah,
you would be fuming. And when you think about LinkedIn in that context, it's like, okay, you have to be posting. It's not okay to be silent when all of your competitors sales teams will be actively posting. But Joe, obviously, I wanted to bring it to the huge employee advocacy program that you were managing at Capgemini. Obviously, an enormous organization, hundreds of thousands of employees. I'm sure there's plenty of learnings you've taken from that. But I wanted to start right at the very beginning and just kind of understand, what did the early days of Capgemini's advocacy program look like?
Yeah. So I think Capgemini was a bit of a pioneer when it came to advocacy, and in fact the program predated me. So the program actually, I think, launched or at least a version of the program launched in 2013. So it was quite forward-looking. Was using LinkedIn Elevate, and it was it was targeted in the terms of who was part of the program, who could join the program, but was fairly open. But still, we have like 340,000 employees, so we're talking less than 1%. Of that base were targeted specifically for this, and it was focused on subject matter experts, and it was really about volume. Right, it was giving people content to share that wasn't not just Capgemini branded content, but also just industry content to share with their networks. And it was so the goal was, to drive influence, and focused an awful lot on training, on developing skills, more so than the previous program did. We still kept it small. I think that we had sort of three layers of advocacy. That's the way we saw it. So you had senior leadership. Then you had our thought leaders, subject matter experts in the middle, and then we introduced also to that same layer account teams, and then you had everybody else. And so for everybody else, we started using LinkedIn My Company. It was free, simple way to put kind of canned messages in front of people. I don't think My Company, it seemed like LinkedIn lost interest in it about 5 seconds after they pushed the release button. And for the senior leadership, we were running a program for our CEO, and we had done for our previous CEO as well. And that was really crucial. Was probably one of the first big learnings was about leading from the top. And one big hurdle we had to get past at the beginning was our CEO's wariness when it comes to social. Nothing that new, right? But do we want to encourage all 340,000 people to start posting on social media? That's a big risk for us. And the mitigating factor was we wrote a code of conduct that would apply to every single employee. And it's kept it simple, 2 pages. Could be kind of summarized as "don't be an idiot," basically. But also very important is that the key message, first of all, for all the employees was that as an employee, when you're on social, you are representing the brand. So what you do on social has an impact on the brand, and therefore will have an impact on you from the brand.
So it's really good to hear, putting that structure in place. Hey, we've just made this really obvious for people. Really, it's a mandatory training exercise. Everybody knows. We can now move on from that almost and go and actually do this
Right.
thing.
Exactly. And yeah, governance is absolutely critical, because the other part of it, of course, was also making sure that those social media managers, because there was like 100 of them managing different channels, and know what to do when they spot something, when they have a crisis, and so that there's a process that they follow and a checklist that and something you work through with, like your comms team, for instance. So you have a crisis management process, not just related to employees, but obviously something terrible happens. Okay, what do you do now? So yeah, really, really important just to have, it gives you that framework that then, as you say, you can then, okay, now let's go. So for the top layer, the senior layer, we developed basically a handbook on how to set up and help your exec get up and running on social. So it was a toolkit basically with different templates and things so to help them build their profile, figure out what is it that they want to talk about, what do they want to be known for, all of that kind of stuff, build an editorial calendar, that kind of thing to help them.
The big advantage to doing advocacy generally top down is you lead from the front, you just get so much more traction off the back of it because everybody follows suit and runs the coattails, and that's great. The challenge is it tends to be the heavy lift at the beginning, right? You're talking to the people that are typically on the older side of things within the business, not social media natives by nature, maybe haven't adopted it in the same way. So you tend to have more basic conversations despite the seniority of the individual, I tend to find. Whereas when you go and talk to the interns and the new account executives who have grown up on Reddit and TikTok and LinkedIn and it's all normal to them, you don't have to have the same conversations in that sense.
Right. Yeah, I think that is generally true. I mean, trust is the big thing that you have to earn the senior leadership's trust that you're not going to make them look bad, basically, and make their life difficult, or make a mistake, say the wrong thing. So that's really important, and that does take time to build up. And it obviously also it does depend on the individuals themselves. What are they willing to share?
Joe, one of the things that I obviously wanted to come on to was how you scaled the program. And you mentioned earlier on about the fact that your initial goal was just volume. And you've just touched on the fact that, different employees want to do different things. Some might just want to be a logo in human form and just share company content. But generally speaking, like you said, authenticity is key. People want to share their own point of view and I guess become thought leaders in that regard. But were there any pivotal moments or just turning points that pushed the program beyond that simple content sharing? Or was it just that feedback that you were getting from employees?
Well, it was a conscious decision, I think. One that took a very long time to be accepted. But people got used to the idea of. I mean, it's partly just sort of legacy approach to social generally, about how do you measure the value, how do you measure success. You posted about this event, was it successful? Well, it got X number of impressions. That's the kind of old school approach where that's how you would measure value. And so yeah, we made a conscious decision that for us, for the advocacy program, especially that middle layer of kind of subject matter experts, it's about changing. It is about influencing people. Basically, it's about building those relationships, deepening those relationships, and kind of getting the message out there about the brand, but also about expertise. Okay, these are voices that you want to listen to, and so therefore, this comes into how do you measure. Ultimately, how did we measure the success of the program? And it's very, very tricky. So we actually developed a whole kind of methodology around measuring success, that wasn't about, okay, how many impressions did this post get? Partly actually because physically we cannot see that number unless they give it to us, right? So it was a conscious decision to say that it's not about necessarily volume of people, it's about the right people making the right connections on the right topics as well. That ultimately is it, and being able to measure that from a data perspective is very difficult. So much of that is just anecdotal, or it's about somebody spending time going through, well, who liked it, who are they connected with now, and you can't do that at scale, of course. So there, it's about asking those people, well, if you spot somebody, let us know, right? Tell us about it. This is a success that you reached that person at that account, for instance. I mean, there are ways to do it also through like a advocacy platform, of course, and you can connect it to your CRM, to be able to see, okay, which accounts are you actually touching. Great, really great. And I think essential, but it's also just about those anecdotal things and people, well, that person direct messaged me and this has resulted in this pitch or whatever it is. That's the kind of stuff you have to kind of find a way to get people to give you those things, capture them, and then be able to use those use cases to promote the program as well as doing the data.
I think that's such an important point, and it's something that I've spoken to clients about in the past of, once this flywheel gets going and things start moving, pick up on those little stories where you can, pick up on those little wins, because they also just, to the broader scope of the employee base at a big business, they're not all digital marketers. And I think that's the thing sometimes people forget. People want to talk about web traffic, conversion funnels, engagement rates, click-through rate. If I'm a account executive at a business, I don't really, those numbers are meaningless to me. They don't impact my day-to-day. So knowing I got a good click-through rate doesn't bear any fruit. But being able to go, well, Phil on this desk closed a £5 million contract off the back of a LinkedIn post. Suddenly you can go, well, I do that as well, and I haven't posted enough on LinkedIn. Maybe I can win a £5 million contract off the back of it.
Yeah, really important. I mean, on the data side, we also, like I said, built this sort of methodology where we were able to effectively give people a score out of 100 every month based on combination of their kind of level of activity and the impact of that activity purely from a data perspective. And it was time consuming. It requires people to actually look at what did this person do? How many times did they post? But we were using four KPIs. One was number of posts, which is first of all very basic, but do they actually do anything?
Without posts, you can't get any other KPIs off the back of it generally.
Exactly. So if that was 0, then everything else is 0. But then we also had network size, but network growth. So what percentage did it grow this month? And then engagement rate. And of course, that was based on network size, not volume of impressions, because that's all we had. But so we had to do something that didn't involve asking those people, okay, can you just look, what were those numbers, or SSI or something like that, because we can't see SSI. So unless they all had Sales Navigator accounts. But
I think ratioing things like that in some format, where you can break this down to just a more kind of complex number to a sense, but actually you're just breaking down all of these things and comparing like for like a lot more. You can compare somebody with 200 followers on LinkedIn against somebody with 200,000 followers and go, actually, well, your engagement rate's significantly lower despite the number of people that follow you, which is a natural thing, but it helps identify people within the business that are also really influential. That's the other thing I've seen. So we do this with clients quite often, and with our platform, we have the advantage we can pull a lot of this data down and we can actually really look at this from an analytics perspective. But once you start noticing people within the business that perhaps were lesser known prior to a platform, but all of a sudden it's this person posts on LinkedIn and gets so much engagement. It's often years of cultivated network that they just haven't really spoken about, and suddenly they start posting to LinkedIn and they get 500 likes and nobody really knows why or how. It feels like magic, but it's just identifying those people, giving those people a chance to do this.
Yeah, and that speaks to how are you choosing who is in your program.
I always think low hanging fruit, particularly when you're getting going and you're really trying to get that kind of snowball effect that happens at big companies as well. Once this thing starts rolling down a hill, it really does start to gather people, and more people want access and see it. So making sure that it's easy for people to access is important. Easy for them to email somebody or get access or log in immediately. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to force people into it. I always see low-hanging fruit. People that are interested in doing this and have a network will naturally gravitate towards it. You don't need to spend hours of time trying to convince, particularly in a big business. SLT is a different story, but don't spend hours of your time trying to convince people to do this when you've got a wide net that you can cast.
Right, exactly. And also don't pick people just because of their job title. There's always a lot of that. Well, you kind of have to have this person because they're the most senior one. It's like, yeah, but this person clearly has not used LinkedIn for several years.
Yeah, their profile picture is from the 90s.
Right. We're going to be pushing water uphill with this person. So it's really sometimes you just have to say, fine, give them a license, and then forget about them.
Yeah. And I think some of that, not to hark too far backwards, but some of that stems from the LinkedIn Elevate days as well, where, for use of a better term, LinkedIn Elevate was very expensive. We saw a lot of movement that came from that when that shuttered, and I think a lot of people still have that in their heads. Well, it's a one-to-one license and it's LinkedIn. It's going to be very, very expensive to do. The costs of these things have gone down. We operate at huge degrees of scale with our clients. We want to give as much rope for you to run with as physically possible, essentially, because it makes a big difference. Like, we're not worried about one or two users. We want you to be able to work in hundreds of users at a time.
Yeah.
When you started to scale the program and when you were onboarding all of these employees from various different departments, did you then have to tailor your content in a way that you didn't have to before to make it relevant to them and their role, or did you already have quite a wide range of content available?
Well, the content was decentralized somewhat. One decision we had to was, okay, are we going to focus just on global people, in global roles? How much are we going to localize it so that you have, a team in Brazil, team in France, whatever, doing it too? That's was quite tricky to do because not all teams are set up the same way. They're not all staffed to the same extent, and so on. The capability, ideal thing is that it's hyper personalized, of course. Really, that rather than you have one message, the same message that goes out to is shared with everybody to share with their networks. That's no good. That's kind of a waste of time. The algorithm doesn't like it. All this duplicate content, the audience doesn't like it either. But you have to accept that is going to be a reality for at least a proportion. But so then it's about segmenting your people into by whether that's regionally, whether that's language, topic, expertise, focus, whatever it is. That's kind of the way it was. So then we had specific people for like specific topics, specific countries, and so on, doing that so that you got at least a modicum of personalization and specificity, I guess that's the right word.
It's a stepping stone journey, is the way we've always described it. And some people will come to your advocacy program halfway through that stepping stone journey and they're already half decent at it and just need a few tweaks. Others will be, just about to make their first step, essentially. And it's just acknowledging that you're a big business, people are in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, and you can't put people into a single cookie cutter approach to this.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and you're continuously cycling people in and out as well.
Joe, you've mentioned a few challenges, and I think the way that you've been able to adapt to those and overcome them. So, with regards to, again, just getting your leadership on board is something that we speak to countless people about, whether clients or guests on this podcast. And that's usually something that actually comes later. And then the challenge becomes, okay, how do we get leadership on board so that we can scale this globally? But obviously, as you mentioned, you had leadership on board really from the early days. So, I'm curious to know, when it came to scaling, what really was the biggest challenge in your mind?
the scale.
Scale of the scale.
Literally just the sheer numbers of people with conflicting needs, conflicting points of view, and different levels of resources and so on. So it is about how, and this is where you have to learn to compromise. And so, as someone that's passionate about advocacy and there's no simple answer to it. I think that's the thing. Is that how do you do advocacy at scale? I don't know. There's the really simple answer. It's just about plugging away at it, finding your champions, your examples, and putting them up there on a pedestal. Get them to talk to their colleagues and to promote it that way. Provide a central home for all the kind of training, content, and stuff they need. So one-stop shop. One thing you considered was like a kind of advocacy in a box kind of approach, where you would build a kind of a model for a program and resources and templates and stuff, a bit like the toolkit that we had for senior execs, and then so that you could then go give that to a business unit, to a country, and say, okay, here's how you do it, and we'll support your journey. But and again, that's for multinational companies to be able to focus. Okay, we're going to focus on the global team, but then enable others to do it.
And I think a big point in that as well is centralizing the ownership, which I think is very much what you alluded to, as well as paying for it, which I think is a whole other topic I could talk for hours about. But centralizing the ownership of it to go, here's a stakeholder that would like to be involved, and there's somebody that is in charge is maybe the wrong term, but in charge to be able to go, yes, great idea.
Yeah.
Would love to support you in that. Off you go. Here's all the assets that you need. It's a pain because you obviously have to centrally own it, and it's time. And as you said, it's 60% of your time was spent managing and sort of talking about advocacy. It's a great thing when there's all those stakeholders coming out of the woodwork going, I've got this really interesting use case, perhaps only interesting to them and about 3 other people at the business at times. But the more of those stakeholders you talk to, the more you end up speaking to somebody who goes, hey, I've got a team of 5,000 people in X, and I really want to drive this as a big initiative. And it's all of those wins across all those stakeholders that make up a big global advocacy program. It just, as you said, it takes time.
Joe, I've got a burning question, and I think given the sheer size of the program that you were managing, I think you might be the perfect person to answer this. And especially given that you said, you can cast a wide net. Basically, what I'm wondering is something that we see quite a lot with employee advocacy programs, especially within larger organizations, is there tends to be a period of disengagement from employees. And this often comes post-launch. So there'll be a big rollout for an employee advocacy program, plenty of comms around it. And then post-launch, once that hype has died down, whoever's managing the program, unfortunately, maybe hasn't implemented the right tactics to keep people engaged. But naturally, some people will just drop off. Other things will come up, they'll have other priorities and so on and so forth. But did you ever go through a period like that, whether it's post-launch or not? And if so, how did you re-engage those advocates?
For sure. I think, maintaining momentum is really, really, really difficult. I think that's one of the hardest parts, and especially when you're working, you're not necessarily in direct control of everybody, and you're relying on different teams and excuse me, like local managers to local social managers and so on. So it's really difficult, and you can launch and everybody's enthusiastic, but then you will see people falling away, or it's the local priorities change, so that somebody's in their ear saying, don't worry about that, don't mind that, let's focus on this instead. Some of that you just have to accept is going to happen, and again, it's you sometimes you have to accept, okay, we're just going to have to leave this business unit out for now. Let's not worry about them. There's no point in wasting time trying to trying to animate them and get them back online, right? That they'll come back around to it eventually. But meanwhile, we're going to focus, and a lot of it's about continuously cycling through who is in the program and who is doing it, so that you're. It makes it quite tiring because you are continuously looking. Okay, let's remove these people. Let's onboard these new people. You're searching for those people that are gonna basically carry themselves and carry their own momentum. So it is difficult, and you do have to prepare to kind of do several launches. I think so. You do your initial launch and so on, but then if you have kind of, I don't know, a new training program or something, I mean, communication, is really important. And being able to have that direct content with you, like your social media managers, so that you're continuously kind of encouraging them, reminding them that this is a thing that they should be doing, and talking about successes and so on. Super important. You've got to just keep throwing different things into the mix, really, and constantly communicating, but also knowing when to let go of people as well. So, okay, this is it's not working. Let's stop. And whether that's with an individual or whether that's with a whole team, you're always just searching for those people that are going to do it. Keep going, and hopefully don't leave as well. One thing we did was we tried to, although we had kind of large number of people, we tried to break them down into groups as much as possible and have people, community managers basically, that were responsible for maybe only 15 people, that we wanted them to kind of check in with those people once a month. Maybe we'd give them like a quarterly report template, so you can say, okay, this is how you've done over the quarters and things that we learned, and these are the successes, things that you did that were really great. What is it that you would like to be able to keep going forward? So to be able to do that, so that we had a whole raft of community managers, not full time. I wish they were full time, but they weren't. But these are people that are also running kind of digital campaigns around those topics, so that they whether it was cloud or cybersecurity or something, that they would have their group of community of 10, 15 people, and they would use have a Teams space that they could use and build that sense of community. And also, actually, something about our measurement methodology was that we were able to plot people on a grid, and it had kind of 4 levels, all the way up to influencer was the top level, so that you could see with your team where you were relative to everybody else this month. And we found that was a really useful tool for kind of creating a bit of competition internally. So people did start to kind of want to, okay, I've got to, if I just do a little bit more next month, maybe I can move up to the next level. Right. And then, so that sense of community, fostering that was also really important, and to be able to do that at the kind of micro level. I was getting those two run the wrong way. Small level. That was, I think, an essential component.
I think the added bonus of that as well is people don't want to be seen to be letting their own team down. Like, yes, it creates that competition because it's, it could be marketing, sales, hypothetically going against each other, or they want to get into that influencer category. But then also, if you've got somebody who's maybe, I don't want to use this phrase necessarily because it is more about personal branding and authenticity, but if maybe they're not pulling their weight, or they feel they're not, they might then be more inclined to share.
You're giving them no place to hide. Yeah, because literally, and we called it the impact score, is what you've got each month, and so you could, if you had an impact score lower than 25, then it was clear you weren't doing it.
I love the phrasing as well.
I was really happy with that too, and it became a way for us to easily recognize, okay, who are the people that are consistently scoring low? Okay, let's get rid of them.
In that case, then, whether from a community manager or from a just one employee advocate, what was the best employee advocacy success story or win that you experienced?
Well, there were definitely we definitely had instances of people being reached out to on LinkedIn about real business opportunities. So and you know, we were able to actually put numbers next to those. So obviously those are the you know, that's the gold dust really, right there as well, when that happens and you can say, okay, this person actually got invited or got invited to you know, present at this thing because I saw your post on LinkedIn, that kind of thing. Then yeah, those are the best.
And I think it just comes back to what we were saying at the beginning of the episode, was that it's probably happening a lot more than we think. It's just how do we hear about that? We can't speak one-to-one with every employee. Again, like at Disseminate, we actually have a dedicated channel on Slack, so that people can just share any success stories and things like that. So obviously we want to hear about it. These anecdotes are gold, but again, we're a much smaller company. It's much easier for us to do that and to encourage people to do that. But no, I think that's fantastic. And the examples that you've shared, just they kind of keep everything going. It's that keeping momentum, because that then encourages more people to sign up, more people come in, more sharing takes place, more wins like that happen. Joe, it's been absolutely fantastic talking to you. I'm sure everybody who's been listening to this episode would like to keep up with you. Where's the best place to do that? Is it LinkedIn?
Yeah, it is. Yes. I'm sporadically active. You know, I'm not very good at practicing what I preach, but I try. But yeah, find me on LinkedIn for sure.
As somebody who follows you, I consider there's a good amount of humor in the post as well, so it's certainly entertaining. But Joe, thank you very much for coming on, and thank you everybody for listening.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a good conversation.